let them in?
I don't know, but the guards suspect everyone.
What if I told you that even the thickest walls in the world cannot protect you from an enemy who is already inside? When the gates close, cutting you off from the outside world, the castle transforms from an impregnable fortress into a huge stone prison. History knows many examples when majestic citadels fell not under the blows of battering rams, but because of a quiet, invisible force that broke the will of the defenders. Watch the video to the end to learn how medieval architects designed castles so that their very construction would help people survive when all hope seemed lost. Are you ready to learn the truth about what actually broke people faster than enemy arrows? The first thing a person faced during a siege was a sudden and irreversible change in their perception of space and time. As soon as the gate grate was lowered, the vast world shrunk to the size of the inner courtyard and a few towers. People accustomed to the open fields and freedom of movement found themselves locked in a cramped stone bag with hundreds of others. Personal space disappeared instantly, replaced by the constant presence of strangers' eyes, breath, and bodies. The feeling of claustrophobia grew with each passing day, turning even the calmest people into tense, nervous wrecks. Isolation from the outside world created an information vacuum that was filled with the most incredible rumors and speculation. The unknown was more frightening than the sight of the enemy army, whose camp was visible from the walls. Every wisp of smoke on the horizon, every sound of a trumpet could be interpreted in two ways, giving rise to either false hope or panic-stricken terror. The second factor was the distortion of time, which in conditions of monotonous waiting, dragged on unbearably slowly. The days merged into one gray strip, where the only events were the changing of the guard and the distribution of meager supplies. The absence of familiar work and activity led people to become fixated on their fears. Constantly being in a closed circle of the same people provoked conflicts over nothing. Minor grievances, which in peacetime would have been forgotten in a minute, here grew to the scale of blood feuds. The social tension inside the walls became more dangerous than the siege engines outside. The psychological pressure was exacerbated by the realization that there was no way out, and that salvation depended not on your actions, but on external forces. This feeling of helplessness and fatalism undermined the discipline of the garrison more than hunger. Commanders had to fight not only the enemy, but also the apathy of their own people. Survival required not only physical endurance, but also tremendous mental fortitude, the ability to remain sane in conditions of sensory deprivation, the ability to find something to do, keep up a conversation, and not give in to despair was worth its weight in gold. Those who couldn't handle the pressure were the first victims of the siege, even if they were well-fed and healthy. It was psychology, not tactics, that often determined the outcome of months of sitting in a fortress. The walls could withstand the blows of stones, but they could not always withstand the crumbling human spirit. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. Do you think you could remain calm after spending months in a confined space with the same people? Write about it in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next analysis of historical survival strategies.
Careful now, don't spill a drop.
What if I told you that the fate of a huge, impregnable fortress often depended on a single hole in the ground? No matter how high the walls were, or how bravely the warriors fought, water always remained the most critical resource. Without food, the garrison could hold out for weeks, but without water, even the most ingenious defense was doomed to complete failure in a matter of days. It was thirst, not enemy swords, that most often opened the gates to the victors. Castle wells were not just utilitarian sources of moisture, but true sacred centers around which the life of the entire garrison revolved. The depth of these shafts sometimes amazed contemporaries, reaching tens of meters into solid rock. The construction of such a well was an incredibly expensive and complex engineering feat, sometimes comparable to the construction of the tower itself. Workers spent years chipping away at the rock by hand to reach the aquifer. The precious source was guarded around the clock by the Lord's most trusted men, and access to it was strictly regulated by the command. No one, not even high-ranking knights, had the right to approach the water without special permission. This was done to eliminate any possibility of deliberate poisoning or accidental contamination of the water. Fear of sabotage was a constant companion of those under siege. A critical problem was the need to leave an untouched supply in case of fire, as fire arrows were the attacker's favorite weapon. Using water to extinguish a fire meant depriving someone of drinking water, but not extinguishing it meant burning alive. Every drop was literally counted, and its consumption was controlled with maniacal precision. An extra sip or a spilled mug could be severely punished. Rainwater was also carefully collected from the huge roofs of the towers and drained down special lead or stone gutters. It flowed into underground cisterns, huge reservoirs lined with stone and waterproofing mortar. These reservoirs served as a strategic reserve for a rainy day in case the main well dried up or became poison. The filtration system in such storage tanks was primitive, but vital to prevent stagnant water from blooming prematurely. Usually, layers of sand and charcoal were used to filter the moisture. However, such water had a musty taste and was drunk only in cases of extreme necessity. But when the choice was between life and death, no one paid attention to the taste. The besieging armies were well aware of this major vulnerability and tried by all available means to deprive the defenders of access to moisture. They could hire miners to try to cut underground veins and divert water away from the castle. Enemies also often tried to destroy external aqueducts or dam streams if the castle was supplied from external sources. In conditions of severe water shortage, people learned to use any available liquid, including those that were previously considered unsuitable. Wine, cider, and ale from the Lord's deep reserves became not a luxury and a source of fun, but the only way to quench thirst. Weak alcohol was even safer than raw water, as some bacteria were killed during the fermentation process. However, drinking alcohol instead of water had dangerous consequences, as alcohol severely dehydrates the body. This made wine an insidious substitute. It provided temporary relief, but brought physical exhaustion closer. A drunken garrison suffering from hangovers and thirst was a poor defender of the walls. Discipline declined and reactions became dulled. Personal hygiene in such conditions took a back seat, as spending precious water on washing was considered criminal waste. This inevitably led to appalling unsanitary conditions, lice, and skin diseases. Dirty clothes stuck to the body, and people who had not washed for months became a sad norm that no one noticed anymore. The choice between cleanliness and preserving life was obvious to everyone. When a well finally dried up, it was the beginning of the end for any fortress, even the most powerful one. The thickness of the walls and the number of towers no longer mattered in the face of a painful death from thirst. The chronicles contain many stories of garrisons surrendering with full storehouses of food and weapons, but without a drop of water. These were the most tragic and bloodless victories in the history of warfare.
Rule and hardtack. Move quickly.
Thank you, sir.
Keep the line moving.
The food distribution system in the besieged castle was harsh, pragmatic, and devoid of any sentimentality. When supplies began to dwindle, the harsh laws of military necessity came into force, where equality did not exist. The first in line to receive a full ration were always the combat-ready warriors who defended the walls. The logic was simple. If the defenders weakened and could no longer hold their weapons, everyone would die, including women and the elderly. Therefore, the soldiers were fed better than anyone else, even if it meant starvation for the rest. The second category consisted of specialists necessary for maintaining the defense: blacksmiths, engineers, and masons. Their labor was critical for repairing fortifications and weapons, so their strength was also preserved. The loss of a skilled craftsman could be fatal for the entire fortress. Nobles and the owner of the castle certainly had their privileges and personal reserves. However, a wise lord understood that ostentatious feasting in front of a hungry garrison could lead to mutiny. Therefore, the consumption of food by the upper echelons was often hidden or restricted in order to maintain morale. At the very bottom of the food pyramid were the servants, refugees from nearby villages, and those who could not directly contribute to the defense. They were given only leftovers, and their rations were cut first when the situation worsened. It was a cruel arithmetic of survival, where life was measured by usefulness. Over time, the diet changed not only in quantity, but also in quality. Fresh produce disappeared first, giving way to salted meat, crackers, and grain. When these ran out, long-term storage reserves, which were normally considered untouchable, were used. The warehouses were controlled by trusted individuals who were personally responsible for the safety of each bag. Theft was punished instantly and severely, often with death, as stealing food was equated with treason. Records were kept meticulously, with every measure of grain recorded. Food preparation became centralized, with individual cooking prohibited in order to save fuel and control portions. The communal pot brought people together, but it also became a place of tension, where everyone made sure that their neighbor did not get more than their share. The constant feeling of hunger changed people's behavior, making them irritable, suspicious, and withdrawn. Conversations increasingly revolved around food, memories of feasts, and dreams of simple bread. This hierarchy, however unfair it may seem to modern man, was the only way to prolong resistance. The castle was a single organism that sacrificed its parts for the survival of the brain and heart. Ready for the shocking truth? The greatest fear within the stone walls was not the enemy's sword, but uncontrolled flames. In conditions of dense construction, an abundance of wooden floors and straw, a fire inside the castle was more terrifying than an assault. Fire was essential for cooking, heating, and lighting, but it also posed a deadly threat. Any spark that fell on dry straw in a stable or warehouse could instantly turn into a firestorm. In an enclosed space, smoke killed faster than the flames themselves. The enemy actively used incendiary shells, arrows with burning tow, and pots with flammable mixtures to cause chaos. Defenders had to be constantly on guard, creating special firefighting teams. Barrels of water and sand stood at every corner, ready for use at any moment. Extinguishing a fire in conditions of water shortage was a nightmare task for any garrison. Often earth, sand, and sometimes valuable reserves of wine or ale had to be used to put out the flames. If the fire got out of control, the only solution was to destroy the burning buildings to create a gap. The smoke filling the courtyards and rooms disoriented the defenders and hindered coordination. In the thick smoke, it was easy to lose direction, fail to notice the enemy, or even attack one's own side. Coughing and watery eyes became constant companions during the siege. Weapons, arrows, and oil supplies posed a particular danger, as they could detonate or ignite. Ammunition depots were located in the deepest stone cellars, far from the outer walls. Losing the arsenal in a fire meant being virtually unarmed in the face of the enemy. Cold was the other side of the coin, especially if the siege took place in winter. The lack of firewood forced people to burn furniture, wooden tools, and even structural elements. The balance between the need to keep warm and the risk of burning the last shelter was delicate. Indoor fires were strictly controlled, and lighting an open fire without orders was a serious crime. People huddled together, trying to keep warm, as it was impossible to heat the huge stone halls. The stone absorbed the heat, turning the rooms into ice boxes. Night fires were not only destructive, but also demoralizing, lighting up the castle for enemy gunners. Fire made the defenders visible targets on the walls, robbing them of the advantage of darkness. Which do you think is worse, freezing without fire or burning from an accidental spark? In the next chapter, you will learn how people communicated with the outside world without phones or the internet. Communication with the outside world was the thin thread of hope that kept the besieged from feeling completely abandoned and forgotten. Even when the enemy's ring closed in, the fortress's isolation was never absolute. Experienced commanders used the most ingenious and sometimes desperate methods to convey important messages to their allies or to the king himself. It was an invisible war for information that ran parallel to the battle of swords and arrows. When darkness fell, fire signals were used, torches and large signal fires, the light from which could be seen for many kilometers. There were entire systems of fire codes, where the number and location of the fires had specific meanings. For example, 3 torches raised simultaneously could mean an acute shortage of food. These signals were simple, reliable, and agreed upon before the war began. Most often, they were requests for urgent military assistance, reports on water supplies, or information about enemy troop movements. Such optical communication allowed for coordination even when completely surrounded. However, this method had a significant drawback. It was visible to everyone. Enemy scouts also kept a close watch on the towers and could try to decipher these signals. Moreover, a cunning enemy could light false fires on neighboring hills to confuse the defenders or lure reinforcements into an ambush. This turned the exchange of signals into a dangerous game of wits, where the price of a mistake was fatal. Pigeon mail was a true biological marvel of medieval communication, a fast and relatively covert means of communication. Specially trained birds were kept in castle dovecotes and released with tiny notes at critical moments. The parchment was rolled into a thin tube and tied to the bird's leg or hidden in a hollow feather. The bird instinctively flew home, carrying the message over the heads of the enemy. The besiegers were well aware of this vulnerability and often brought their own trained falcons and hawks to intercept the feathered messengers. The sky above the castle became a battlefield where predators hunted postmen. Each bird that broke through was a small victory that could save thousands of lives. Archers also received a reward for each pigeon shot down flying from or to the fortress. A much more risky and heroic method was used by secret foot messengers who tried to slip through enemy lines. These people had to possess incredible courage, excellent knowledge of the terrain, and simply fantastic luck. They used old abandoned secret passages, foul-smelling sewers, or narrow crevices in the rocks. Often these daredevils had to climb down high walls on ropes in the darkest and most unguarded places under the cover of a moonless night. They had to sneak through the enemy camp, full of guards and dogs, which was practically a suicide mission. If such a messenger was caught, he faced a painful death in full view of the entire garrison to intimidate the others. Sometimes, when all other options were exhausted, more exotic, almost hopeless methods were used. The defenders could float messages down the river flowing through the castle, hiding them in sealed barrels or hollowed-out pieces of wood. It was a real lottery, where the chance that the message would be caught by their own people downstream was negligible. But in desperation, people seized every opportunity because hope was the last to die. The most dangerous enemy always wears the same uniform as you and eats from the same pot. Fear of internal betrayal was a constant companion of any long siege, eroding trust among the defenders. In conditions of hunger, hopelessness, and fear, the temptation to open the gates in exchange for life and a purse of gold was great. The enemy actively fueled these sentiments by sending spies or bribing someone from the garrison. Suspicion became the norm. Every sidelong glance, every careless word could be interpreted as a sign of treason. Commanders created networks of informants within their own troops to monitor morale. The atmosphere of universal surveillance weighed on the psyche no less than hunger. The keys to the gates and important towers were entrusted only to the most trusted people, and their bearers changed constantly. Night guards were duplicated to rule out the possibility of collusion between the sentries and the enemy. No one could remain alone on the wall. History knows many examples when impregnable fortresses fell because of one bribed guard. The thought that all efforts and hardships could be negated by someone's greed drove loyal defenders mad. Trials of suspects were swift and cruel, often exemplary to intimidate others. The slightest piece of evidence or denunciation was enough to send a person to prison or to the gallows. Wartime justice knew no mercy and no presumption of innocence. Sometimes betrayal was committed not out of greed, but out of a desire to save one's family or simply to end suffering. Such motives were understandable from a purely human point of view, but unforgivable from the point of view of military duty. The line between humanism and treason was blurred. Loyalty was constantly tested. Oaths, vows, joint prayers. Religion played an important role in uniting the garrison, declaring betrayal not only a crime, but also a mortal sin. Priests were as important figures in defense as captains. Rumors of traitors were often spread by the enemy themselves to sow discord and paranoia. Destroying the unity of the defenders was more effective than any battering ram. A castle where soldiers no longer trusted each other was doomed. The shadow of betrayal made the nights in the castle especially dark, forcing people to listen not only to noises outside, but also to footsteps in the corridor. Any siege, even the longest, would end sooner or later, and there were few options for the finale of this drama. Lifting the blockade, a decisive assault, or forced surrender. It was the inevitable conclusion to a game in which the lives of thousands of people were at stake. Each of these outcomes brought its own unique trials and forever changed the fates of those who were lucky enough to survive. For the inhabitants of the castle, this day became either a second birthday or the day their world ended. The opportunity to breathe fresh air after the musty stench of the overcrowded fortress seemed like the greatest gift from heaven. However, the first wave of wild joy was inevitably followed by the heavy realization of the losses and the scale of the destruction. If there was no hope of rescue from outside and supplies were running low, difficult negotiations about surrender began. It was a complex diplomatic game where every word could cost hundreds of lives. The commandant of the fortress tried to bargain for mercy, using what influence he had left and threatening to burn the castle along with its treasures. The lives of the defenders depended entirely on the eloquence of the negotiators and the mood of the enemy commander. The terms of surrender could vary from an honorable exit of the garrison with weapons and banners to a humiliating complete surrender. Sometimes the knights were allowed to leave, but were required to leave all their gold and supplies to the victors. In other cases, the garrison could be publicly executed as an example to other rebellious fortresses. The code of knightly honor played a huge role here, although it was not always observed. The assault was the bloodiest and most terrible finale, a real chaos in which the overwhelming majority of defenders usually perished. If the enemy broke into the city by force, the rules of mercy ceased to apply and the massacre began. The victors, embittered by their long siege and the loss of their comrades, often spared neither women nor children. At such moments, the law of the strongest became the only law. Those who miraculously survived the slaughter often envied the dead, finding themselves in harsh captivity or lifelong slavery. The fall of the castle meant the end of the familiar world, a complete change of power in the old order. Noble prisoners became living commodities for ransom, and ordinary soldiers often ended their lives on galleys. It was a complete disaster that erased the past. After the active phase of the siege ended, there was a long period of deafening silence and slow recovery. This process could take years because it was necessary not only to rebuild the walls, but also to restore the economy. A castle that survived the war forever bore the traces of the struggle in its stonework and in the memory of the local residents. Black marks from fires and potholes from stones became part of its architecture. The psychological trauma suffered by people in close confinement under constant threat of death remained with the survivors for the rest of their lives. Medieval people did not know the term post-traumatic stress disorder, but they felt its effects very well. Many former defenders could never return to their former carefree state of mind. The shadow of the horror they had experienced always hung over them. Returning to a normal, peaceful life was an incredibly difficult process of adaptation. People had to relearn how to trust their neighbors, how not to hide and hoard every piece of bread, and how to sleep in complete silence without waiting for an alarm. The sight of a full plate of food could bring tears to a veteran's eyes, and a loud noise could trigger a panic attack. The world seemed fragile and unreliable to them. Ultimately, simple physical survival was in itself a great victory over circumstances. But the price of this victory was always exorbitantly high, paid for with health and lost years. Many survivors felt guilty toward their fallen comrades, wondering why they had survived. The final silence after the army's departure was not just emptiness, but a space for deep reflection on what had been experienced. It was the moment of truth when it became crystal clear to everyone who they really were. The siege mercilessly tore off all social masks, leaving only the bare essence of a person and they had to live with this truth. What topics from the history of survival would you be interested in seeing in future episodes? Perhaps life on a pirate ship or survival in a polar expedition? Write your suggestions in the comments. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new exciting dives into history.